In the past, in Mecca, at the beginning of the emergence of Islam, the Prophet and his people from among the Bani Hashim and Muthalib had experienced boycott from the Quraysh tribe. The boycott of the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims by the pagan Quraysh of Makkah occurred around the 7th year of prophethood, precisely in the month of Muharram. The boycott was a political strategy of the polytheists of Mecca. This boycott was initiated by Abu Sufyan, Abu Jahal, and Umayyah bin Khalaf. The leaders of Quraysh were worried about the rapid development of the Prophet's da'wah. They felt threatened by the teachings of Islam brought by the Prophet Muhammad, who called for monotheism and rejected idol worship as the religion of their ancestors. As written by Sheikh Shafi'ur al-Mubarakfuri in the book Ar-Rahitu al-Maktum, page 119, that before the boycott, some of the great figures of Quraysh had first embraced Islam, including Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, then followed by Umar bin Khattab, and Bani Hashim and Muthalib had united to protect their people, namely the Prophet Muhammad, as a descendant of the Muthalib clan. On the other hand, this boycott was also triggered by the anger of the pagan Quraysh towards the Prophet's increasingly intensive preaching. The disbelievers of Quraysh were not happy with the teachings of Islam, which invited them to abandon idol worship and replace it with worship of Allah. Even the leaders of Quraysh were worried that the Prophet's da'wah would threaten their position as political and economic leaders in Mecca. Meanwhile, Ibn Hisham in the book Sirah Nabawiyah, page 218, mentions the cause of the boycott against the Prophet and his tribe, because Umar bin Khattab and Hamza embraced Islam. More than that, both of them defended the Prophet and his companions, and Islam had spread widely in the tribes of Quraysh. Finding the politics unstable, the Quraysh immediately gathered for a meeting in the village of Bani Kanana. In that meeting, they planned a conspiracy by making a treaty addressed to Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib. The contents of the agreement made the Muthalib and Hashim suffer. Rasulullah and his people were boycotted from economic activities, trade, and so on. In Sirah Nabawiyah, Ibn Hisham documented 4 important points in the boycott. Firstly, the Quraysh were not to marry women from Bani Hashim and Bani Abdul Muttalib. Secondly, they were not to marry the daughters to those of Bani Hashim and Bani Abdul Muttalib. Thirdly, they should not sell anything to the Bani Hashim and the Bani Abdul Muttalib. And fourthly, they should not buy anything from Bani Hashim and Bani Abdul Muttalib. On the other hand, Sheikh Shafi'ur al-Mubarakfuri, on page 119, explains that the boycott agreement was written on a piece of board that was hung in the Kaaba, and contained the agreement and determination of the Quraysh people to boycott the Bani Hashim and the Bani Muttalib. This boycott agreement was written by Bagi bin Amir bin Hashim. Bagi was one of the Quraysh figures who opposed the spread of Islam. This agreement was made with the aim of forcing Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib to abandon the Prophet Muhammad and return to the teachings of the ancestors. The boycott was really strict. The clans of Bani Hashim and Muthalib were isolated from the outside world. As a result, the reserves and foodstuffs had run out. Meanwhile, the polytheists did not allow foodstuffs to enter Mecca. Even if they did, they would immediately buy it, so that the Banu Muthalib and Hashim could not have it. These conditions were truly horrific, and led to famine. Al-Mubarakfuri describes the Prophet's suffering because of the boycott on page 120, as follows. Until they experienced hardship and were forced to eat dry leaves and skins. Even heard from behind the village the sound of women and children crying because of hunger from the village of Abu Talib. Such was the plight of the Prophet and his people, who had reached the point of weakness and were forced to eat dry leaves and skins to survive. The sound of their wives and children crying out in pain could be heard from beyond the village. Once upon a time, Hakim bin Hizam, the nephew of the Prophet's wife Khadija, came to Mecca to give his aunt Khadija some grain to eat, but Abu Jahal caught him and forbade him to take the grain with him. Eventually, the two had a tense argument. In the midst of the famine, the Quraysh did not care about the plight of Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib during the boycott. They did not provide any assistance, even if the Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib were sick or starving. This condition lasted for 3 years. The Prophet and his people were exiled and isolated, in order to stop the Prophet's preaching. These cruel policies they wrote on a shahifa, sheet, containing a covenant and an oath. That they will forever accept no peace from the Bani Hashim and will have no mercy on them, unless they are willing to deliver him, the messenger of Allah, to be killed. The treaty was executed and hung inside the Kaaba. Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib, whether believers or disbelievers, remained adamant in defense of the Prophet. They were isolated in the cleft of Abu Talib's hill on the first night of the month of Muharram in the 7th year of prophethood, some say other than this date. Those who had believed were ostracized on the hill because of their beliefs, while those who have not believed and still get the exclusion because they are considered to protect the Prophet. That is, all members of Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib were boycotted, except for one person, Abu Lahab. The boycott lasted for 3 years. From Muharram of the 7th year of prophethood to Muharram of the 10th year of prophethood. During those 3 years, Bani Hashim and Bani Muthalib suffered greatly. There was no food that they could eat. In fact, they were forced to eat leaves and skins. Not only that, the screams of women and babies groaned under the gripping hunger. Whenever a companion of the Prophet came to buy food from a caravan coming to Mecca, Abu Lahab called out to the caravan to double the price, so that the companion could not afford it. O merchants, raise your prices for the companions of Muhammad, so that they cannot buy anything. Abu Lahab exclaimed. After 3 years of boycotting, the action was condemned by some people from among the Banu Quraysh. They agreed to cancel the agreement, while at the same time, Allah had sent an army of termites to eat the covenant sheet that was hung in the Kaaba. Allah told the Prophet that now the sheet containing the covenant had been eaten by termites. Finally, the Prophet told the news to his uncle, Abu Talib. So, Abu Talib approached the Quraysh and conveyed what he had just heard from his nephew. Abu Talib then demanded them to open it. Long story short, the Quraysh agreed to Abu Talib's request. They lowered the sheet from the Kaaba and slowly opened the sheet that was still rolled up. All eyes were on it. Sure enough, once opened, the sheet had been damaged by termites and left only the recitation of Allah. However, the Quraysh were evasive, and thought it was just Muhammad's magic. Ah, this is all your nephew's magic. Their disbelief grew. Shortly thereafter, 5 leaders of Quraysh came forward to lift the embargo that they had imposed. They were Hisham bin Amr bin Harith, Zuhair bin Umayyah, Muthaim bin Adi, Abul Bakhtari bin Hisham, and Zamar bin Aswad. Of the 5, the first to come forward openly to lift the embargo was Zuhair bin Umayyah. He was followed by the other 4. Muthaim bin Adi then tore up the treaty sheet. Next, the 5 men met with Bani Hashim, Bani Muthalib, and the people who had been boycotted in the sheep of Bani Muthalib. They were released and returned to their homes.